Okay, so welcome everybody. It is my honor to introduce to you Professor Anne-Marie Lagrange today, who will talk to us about discovering new worlds. So this talk is part of the International Science Education Forum in the project of promoting Taiwan Top Science Student Project. So Professor Lagrange is an expert in searching for exoplanets. She has been using different techniques, including radio velocities and direct imaging to search for exoplanets. And she was she was the discoverer of the Beta Pictoris B planet orbiting around the Beta Pictoris star. So I think I will let her tell you more about this. So let's welcome her. And before we start, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to type in the chat, or you can ask your question at the end of the talk. Professor Lagrange will have some time to answer our question after the end of the talk. So let's welcome her.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now. So first, I would like to thank Professor Ying for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk about my research in this forum. It's really a pleasure and an honor for me to share this moment with you, even during this very peculiar time where face-to-face meetings and conferences are not possible. Before I start talking about my favorite topics, I would like to say a few words about astronomy in general. As you may know, astronomy is a very ancient science, maybe the most ancient and also, at least to me, the most fascinating one. Our understanding of the universe has improved over the centuries, and yet we do not know how the universe formed, how the planets and the Earth formed, how life started. These questions, you see, are very theoretical, but at the same time, everyone, old people, young people, everyone would like to know the answers. This is probably why astronomy is such a great and wonderful tool to promote science. When I talk about science, I mean physics, mathematics, chemistry, computing science, every tool that we need to do modern astronomy today. And as I said, it's an excellent tool to promote science among the whole population, the general public, and especially among the young generations, the students and the pupils. I am used to do conferences for all these kind of people, and I realize every time how people are interested in learning about the universe and about the planets, about astronomy in general. And what my greatest pleasure is when at the end of the talk, people, and especially young people, come and tell me that they would really like to participate to this fascinating adventure. I hope this talk will illustrate how basic science, the very basic laws of physics that you learn at school, at college, can allow to widening our view of the universe and better understand our place in the universe. So the existence of other worlds is a very ancient question that has been addressed first, I would say, by philosophers, religious people, and scientists. The ancient Greeks that we see here, Epicurus and Aristotle, did not agree on the matter. And you will see that all over the time, people do not necessarily agree on the theories, but that is what is nice with science, actually, is that we can have different views, ideas, and we are here to test them. Epicurus argued that the worlds are unlimited. Some are are similar to ours, others are not. Aristotle, on the contrary, thought that there couldn't be another worlds. It couldn't imagine that it would be possible. And the question, the debate remained like that for many, many centuries. An underlying question is, what is a world? And this notion was indeed very vague 2,000 years ago. The question has been kind of frozen during several centuries because of the lack of scientific grounds, and also because it was believed for many centuries that the Earth was at the center of the universe. It was thought, it was a Ptolemaic system, that everything was rotating around the Earth. So the Earth had a very, very special position in the universe. And so it was very difficult to imagine that there could be other worlds. Then there was what we call everything changed because of what we call the Copernican revolution. And Copernicus in the 16th century had the great idea to propose another system in which the Earth was no longer at the center of the universe, but was in fact rotating, orbiting around the sun like the other planets that were known at this time. And this was really a revolution in the way of thinking the world and the universe in general. So everything changed. And this was a major step. Then Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Descartes proposed the basics of the physics, the universal laws of the physics by Newton, of the gravitation, which and so it was a new way to explain the dynamics of the planet around the system based on physical law, and this is what allows modern astronomy to flourish. In the 18th century, the first theories of the formation of our solar system were proposed by Swedenborg, Kant, and Laplace. What they proposed is that the solar system was built from the collapse of what they called the nebulae, a gaseous nebulae that was collapsing, and from that came the sun and the planets. This is what we call the nebular hypothesis. And this hypothesis is at the basic of what we think today is the origin of the formation of the solar system. Of course, with we have now much more detail and a much better understanding of the processes that happen. Since then, we have learned a lot. We have visited the solar system, and we know much more what is the solar system. We know that there is the sun at the center, so a star. Then the 4 planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, which are called telluric planets because they are solid planets. They are small and solid. And then going further beyond the orbit of Mars and the asteroids, we have what we call the giant planets. Jupiter, the biggest one. Jupiter mass is 300 times the mass of the Earth. Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. These are the giant planets. They are supposed to be made mainly of gas, while the Earth planets the telluric planets are made of a solid material. So we know much better how our solar system looks like. And now what we want to do is to know if there are other planetary systems around other stars. So planets around stars other than the sun. So what do we want to know? We know now since about 100 years, that there are 100 billions of stars like the sun in the galaxy, in our galaxies. This is an image, not a real image, of how our galaxy may look like if we were to look at it from above. And the sun is just one system, one tiny star among many, many others. So we know that there are many stars like the sun in our galaxy. We know now, and this is, for instance, an Hubble image, that there are 2 billion of galaxies in the universe. So we want to know how many planets are there. Are there other planetary systems, what I call other worlds, around in the universe? Another question that we want to address is, do the planetary system, what do planetary systems look like? Are they all similar to the solar system, or is there a diversity in the architecture of the planetary system, or even in the composition of the planets themselves? This is the second question. The third question is, how do these planets form? As I said earlier, since the 18th century, we think that the planets and the sun were formed from the collapse of a gaseous and a gaseous cloud. In fact, in star-forming region, now we know, and you have here an image of a star-forming region in Orion, and in this region, the dust. There is dust. The dust is about a fraction of a micron, so very small dust, and very small grains, and a lot of gas. And we want to know how, from these very, very tiny, small grains and the gas, how we form the sun and the planets, which are many, very, very big compared to what we start from. And this is a very fascinating question, the formation of the planetary system. And I know people in Taiwan are working on the dynamics of the system and the star-forming regions as well. So we want to know the frequency of the other worlds, the formation of planetary system. We want to explore the diversity, and we finally want also to see if there are signatures of life on other planets, other planetary systems. And to do that, we have to learn to know a lot about many things in the universe. We have to know about the interstellar medium. We have to know about the solar system, the sun, the planets, the comets. We have to know about stars, which are, of course, very important. And so all this requires us to have some knowledge, at least some knowledge, in physics, in chemistry, in mathematics, in computer science. So you see many types of science, of topics in science, what we call hard science. And finally, another maybe specificity of astronomy and of this field in particular is that in order to progress, we need to develop instruments which are and I will talk about them later. We have to build very, very good instruments. We have to do lots of observation, and we have to do a lot of modeling to be able to understand that. So you see, it's a very broad range of skills and that we need from people: optician, mechanician, mechanic people, computer intelligence, artificial intelligence. We need a lot of skills to be able to answer such question. Of course, not one single person doesn't have all these skills, but we need all type of people. This is what I mean. So when people, the question of seeing whether other planetary systems exist was not possible to answer until let's say the late 70s, until the late 70s, 80s. This is because it's so difficult to detect these planets. I will show you later that the first idea that we astronomers could have would be to look at a planet, to see the planet itself, but it's very difficult. So people realized 30 years ago that if we were to detect planets at this time, it would not be by directly seeing the planets, but detecting the effect they produce on the star around which the planets orbit. You have here a system with the star and a planet orbiting, and what the basic laws of physics that you learn at school, actually even before college, you learn that at high school normally, is that the planet turn around orbit around the sun, but the sun also orbit, in fact, around the sun and the planet, actually, both orbit, in fact, around the center of mass of the system. And so as the star is moving, we can measure the velocity of the star compared to us. And if there is a planet around the star, you will have a variation of the velocity of the star at the function as a function of time, and the period of the variations will be periodical, and the period will be exactly the period of the planets. So it will give you the time that the planet makes a turn around, that is needed for the planet to make a full circle around the star. And so it will give also you the distance of the planet to the sun, to the star. And the amplitude of these variations will give you information on the mass of the planet. And of course, the amplitude is the variation, the velocity variation of the star are very, very small, but it's much easier to detect that than to detect the photons of the planets. So this is how the first planet was discovered around a star other than the sun. And this was a discovery in back in 1995 of 51 Pegasus B, which was discovered in France at Observatoire de Haute-Provence by Didier Queloz and Michel Mayor, who are very close colleagues from Switzerland. And they got the Nobel Prize 2 years ago because of these results. So what they detected is this type of variation, and it was realized that it was due to a planet that was about half the mass of Jupiter. But what is interesting is that the planet was orbiting in 4 days. The orbital period of the planet was 4 days instead of whereas Jupiter orbits the sun in 12 years. So it means that the planet that we see here is like Jupiter in terms of mass, but it is orbiting 20 times closer to the star than Jupiter. In fact, it is really, really close to the star. And this was very incredible results, because people were at this time were looking at Jupiter analogs orbiting far from the star, what we call 5 astronomical units. 1 astronomical unit is the distance between the star and the Earth. So Jupiter is orbiting 5 times further away than the Earth from the sun. And here 51 Pegasus B is orbiting 20 times closer 100 times closer to the star than Jupiter. And this raised the question, what is this planet doing there? Because we know that this planet cannot have formed so close to the star because there is not enough material to form such a big planet. So it has to be formed further away and probably migrated close to the star because of interaction between the planet and the disk in which the planet was forming. Other possibilities could be that the planet had been scattered because of gravitational perturbation by many planets around the star, but mostly we think that this type of planets have rather migrated in the disks. Since these early days, 95, the people, the number of people working in this domain has really increased a lot, and what we call now exoplanetology has become a major topic of research in astronomy. And thanks to this enthusiasm, we have got money to build new instruments, much better, much more precise, that now, for instance, are able to detect in spectroscopy, like the instrument that was used to detect 51 Pegasus B. New spectrographs to measure the radial velocities of the star have been built, and we have now won a factor of 100 in terms of precision. It means that we can now detect planets around stars that are of the order of the mass of the Earth, orbiting very close to the star. But while at the beginning we could detect only giant planets, we can now detect what we call super Earths. That means planets that have masses much smaller, comparable to the mass of the Earth. For the moment, we are not able to detect Earth mass planet at the same distance as the Earth in radial velocity, because it's too complicated. I will come back later. And so, thanks to this result, the number of planets detected with this method is now about 800 planets, and people have been crazy about these planets. And in fact, with the detection of the planet around Proxima Centauri, people have made very nice illustration that you can see on the newspapers. But you have to be very careful when you look at this. When you see such images, they are not real images; they are illustration. And what we know, in fact, about Proxima Centauri B is only this curve. So it's very different from the illustration that we have. And you have to be always very careful about that. Now, what we would like to detect is planets that are very comparable to the Earth. That means planets that are at the same distance as the Earth. Around other stars. And in fact, I've been working on that since many years, and it's really difficult to do that, because, as you know, the sun and the solar type stars are very active, and they have at their surfaces, they have spots, they have granules, they have flares, and this activity creates what we call stellar noise, which is much higher in amplitude, in strength, than the tiny signal here that you see in green that we want to detect. So today, at the time of today, we are not able to detect what we call Earth twins with radial velocity method, but many efforts are made to correct from the stellar noise, and so as to be able to detect such Earth twins. I now move to another very successful method, a very naive, very simple method that has been used to detect planets, extrasolar planets. It's the following one. It's what we call transit photometry. In this method, we just look at measure the flux that the brightness of the star that we receive from the star on Earth, and we wait until a planet crosses the disk of the star. When if a planet happens to cross the disk of the star, it will create a very small eclipse, and so the light received from the star will be smaller during a short time, a few minutes to a few hours, depending on the size of the planet, and the frequency will depend on the distance of the planet compared to the star. And this has allowed to detect a planet around, not to detect, because it was already detected in radial velocity, but this transit has been detected around the star HD 209458 in 1999, and it was again, of course, a planet with a very short period, a giant planet at this time. This was done from the ground, and since that time, but we know that, of course, the atmosphere, which is above the Earth's atmosphere, is very problematic for photometry, to measure the luminosity of the star, and it's much easier to do that from space. And since these discoveries, there has been several attempts, several successful attempts, I should say, to put telescopes in space that will record the light of and the variation of the light of thousands, tens of thousands of stars. The first one was installed by a French satellite, and then there were Kepler, which was Corot. NASA then launched the Kepler satellite, the TESS satellite, and the ESA, the European Space Agency, launched Cheops 2 years ago. And thanks to this observation in space, we are now able to detect. We have also a factor of 100 in precision, which makes that, again, while at the very beginning, we are able to detect only Jupiter mass planets, we are now able to detect Earth mass planets. So 100 times or more lighter than Jupiter's. This method has also allowed to detect multiple systems, and you have here a very, very nice system with 7 planets that have been detected by the TRAPPIST observatory, the TRAPPIST telescope. And you see here again an illustration that there was in Universe Today a few years ago, illustrating what this planet could like. But please don't believe that we have obtained such nice images. Thanks to that, the Kepler satellite has allowed to identify hundreds of planets in this system, and it's really a symphony of planets that we see here. Each system here is a detection. You have at the center the star, and planetary system, very different planets that orbit the star that you will see here moving, and there is also some music behind. So you see the great diversity of planets, of planetary system that has been observed already today. So we know that there are planets, but we see that the planets are very, very diverse in terms of architecture, in terms of number of planets per star, and so on. I will come back on that later. For many of us, the Graal is to see really the planet, to detect the photons of the planet. And to do that, it's very difficult because the planets and are very close to the sky, to the star in the sky. And so this is the first problem. And because the planets are much, much fainter than the sun, than the star. If you imagine that we see our solar system from 40 light years away, so very close to us, but yet as another system, the distance between the Earth and the sun would be the size of a basketball located 500 kilometers away. The Jupiter distance would be 5 times bigger, so it would larger. So it would be the size of a basketball 100 kilometers away. So you see, it's very, very close. And Jupiter is about 100 million times fainter than the Sun, and the Earth is 5 billion times fainter than the Sun. So it's very difficult. You have to fight these problems. And we have another problem, is that if we look at this through the atmosphere, if we want to detect planets from the ground with large telescopes, we have the problem, the following problem, that the starlight coming, the star coming from the light, sorry, coming from the star is deviated in the atmosphere of the Earth because of the turbulence that is present in the atmosphere. And this is a huge problem. And without big computers, it was known that we would never be able to make images sharp enough to detect planets. To illustrate that, I have put the Sun, the sketch of the Sun, the Earth, and the planet, and the giant planet, Jupiter, and behind, and this is in white, the image of a star that we get with the very large telescope in Chile. And you see that the light of the star is very much spread because of the atmosphere. And to show you another illustration, this is the same image that we get with the SPHERE instrument, which is an imager, an instrument that we have built in Chile at the ESO observatory to image planets. This is the image of the star after how we get it on the telescope, on the detector. And the size here is 1 arcsecond, so this is very much bigger than the distance between the planets, for instance, Jupiter and the Sun. So we have to correct from the perturbation of the atmosphere using what we call adaptive optics. Adaptive optics is really a technique that is absolutely needed if we want to get sharp images. And what I will show now is the image of the same star observed with the same telescope, just when we put on the adaptive optics system and we correct from the perturbation of the atmosphere. This is the same star, same scale. So what you see is that we have been able to concentrate the light of the star in a very sharp core, and we retrieve what we call the diffraction limit of the telescope. And thanks to that, we will be able ultimately to detect a planet, to make images of planet. But for the moment, the light that is here is still too big to be able to detect a planet, because the contrast of light between the star and the planet is too high. So we have to block the light of the star here at the center using what we call coronographic masks. Hop, and this is what we get of the same star. When we use a coronographic mask, we have blocked out most of the light of the star. We have still a little bit of light, but here you see very dark patches, very dark region in which you will be able to detect planets. And yet this is not even sufficient enough. In fact, we have then after this step, we are able to detect a companion that would be 10,000 times less bright, fainter than the star. This is not enough because we need to win another factor of 100. And this is done by computer, by what we call post-processing of of the images. And this is something that we spend a lot of time on in order to process the images so that we can reach the contrast that we need. And here in this example, we have now a contrast of about 1 million at 0.5 arc seconds, so at the distance of Jupiter to the Sun, if it was looked 40 light years away. And so it means that we could detect a planet that is 1,000 times, 1 million times fainter than the Sun, thanks to all these steps. So you see, it's very complicated. It requires a lot of computing capacity to correct from the atmosphere perturbation and to make the post-processing of the data. So this is why detecting directly planet has been not possible for many, many years, and we have had to wait, in fact, until the beginning of the century to detect the first images of exoplanets. And this is something that we did with my team. We detected here the little tiny point, red point that you see here, which is due to a massive planet, actually at the limit between a planet and a brown dwarf, what we call brown dwarf. 30 Jupiter masses is the limit between planets and brown dwarfs. And you see here this companion, which is behind orbiting a star that is here hidden behind a mask, and you still have some light around. And the distance between the planet and the star is about 260 astronomical units. That means 260 times further away than the Earth compared to the Sun. So it was another mystery that was read with the direct imaging, is that we found exoplanets that are very, very far away from the stars, so planets that do not exist in the solar system. Another example of a planetary mass companion we detected 15 years ago with Gaël Chauvin is a 5 Jupiter mass body around a brown dwarf. A brown dwarf is a body with a mass between 13 and 80 Jupiter masses, and then after beyond these masses you have stars. So a brown dwarf is in between planets and stars. And this guy here is about 5 to 10 to 8 Jupiter masses, and it's orbiting at 50 astronomical units. So these were really the first photons of planetary mass bodies that were not coming from planets from the sun, from the solar system. And we did that with an instrument that we had built to be installed on the Very Large Telescope in Chile. It was the first adaptive optics instrument on the VLT at this time. A new step was reached in 4 years later by a colleague of mine, Christian Marois, and collaborators, who detected with another telescope a system with 3 planets here, directly imaged, the tiny points that you have here, red, at 24, 38, and 64 astronomical units. It was the first multiple system that was directly imaged. About the same time, we detected in Chile this little point here, northeast from a star, Beta Pictoris, and you see here when we detect, as it was in 2003. And 6 years later, it was located here, and which means that the planet had moved around the star between 2003 and 2009. And in fact, it was great because it was the first planet that we saw moving around its star. At the same time, it was quite frustrating and scaring for us because when we tried to observe, when we discovered this, the planet, it was in fact in 2008, even if on the data that had been taken in 2003, because we had not been able to, we had not the good post-processing to detect it in 2003. When we detected it, it was 2008, and we tried to observe the system again, and we didn't see anything. And in fact, we didn't see because the planet was behind the star, and it couldn't be seen in 2008. We could only see it again in 2009. And since that time, we have been monitoring the Beta Pictoris b planet that I just showed, because it's a very interesting planet. It's the closest planet that has been imaged around another stars and the Sun. And it is orbiting at about the same distance as Saturn around the star, meaning that it rotates. It needs about 20 years to go around the star. So it means that we can really monitor its orbit. And you see here that the planet is orbiting, in fact, within a disk of dust, and it was based from the shape of the disk of the dust that we had predicted the presence of a planet in the 90s. And so we are going to zoom into the system and to see, this was the discovery of the planets and the recovery. And then you see here all the images that we have obtained on Beta Pictoris since that time. And you see that it is moving around the star. This is the latest images also. And you see here, this is the first image, and so far the only star for which we have been almost able to detect its a full orbit around a star and others than the Sun. So the Beta Pictoris system is really a very, very nice system, and we have made lots of studies around. We have detected another planet using radial velocity 2 years ago. It's really a fascinating system. Another system that has been detected in direct imaging with our SPHERE instrument that we built as I mentioned, on the Very Large Telescope. This is a system of 2 planets that has been detected recently by Bone et al. These 2 planets that are orbiting here around the solar-type stars. And again, they are far from, these planets are at 160 astronomical units, 320 astronomical units, so very, very far away from the star. And again, the question is, how did they get there? A last system I want to show is a very fascinating one, is a PDS-70b. It's, in fact, the planet is here, is orbiting a very young star, which is between 2 and 10 and 14 million years. And all the images of the planets that we are able to image today are young. They are a few tens million years, because if they are older, when they get older, the planet gets colder, and we are not able to detect them today. But what is interesting in this system is that it is still surrounding the star, which is behind the black circle here. You see a planet here. In fact, there is another planet here. They are lying in the protoplanetary disk in which they have formed. So it means, and we have evidence that the planets are still accreting material. And so we have here the really cocoon. You see here the cocoon of material, the remnant of the nebulae, the gaseous nebulae, the planetary nebulae, in which the planet form. We are witnessing really forming planets around another sun. And this system is very, very fascinating. There have been images. This is an image by our instrument SPHERE. There have been images by the ALMA telescope. And we have 2 planets that are accreting around the star. And by the way, with the SPHERE, we have detected many, many disks like that, protoplanetary disks, in which means the disk in which the planets are forming. And you see that one fascinating thing to see is that all these disks are very structured. Some have spirals, some have rings like this one, rings like this one. They have holes. They have gaps between the disk, and people think that it may be the signatures of a planetary system of planets that we still do not see. And in fact, PDS 70b is the first planet of this kind. And ALMA has also made very, very nice images in millimeter wavelengths of such disk, and we have exactly the same structures, meaning that what I mean here is that we have not detected so far many planets in direct imaging, let's say 10, 15, but we know that we will detect others. We just need better instruments and better computing post-processing data tools. So what do we know today? Extrasolar planets, we have about 5,000 extrasolar planets that are known, 700 multiple systems. And what is very important is the diversity of the systems that we have detected. We have detected these hot Jupiters, these Jupiters like 51 PEG B, which are orbiting very close to the star, much closer than the Earth that you see here. This is Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. So we have detected these hot Jupiters that have no counterpart in the solar system. We have detected the massive giant planet very far away from the star, like the one that I showed you in direct imaging, or this other one, which is orbiting at 600 astronomical units, this massive giant. And we have detected also super Earths that in massive Earths between 2 and 5, 10 Jupiter masses that have no counterpart in the solar system, because these are solid planets. And in the solar system, the most massive solid planet is the Earth. And the mass of this guy here is much more important than the mass of the solar system planet. We have detected oceans planets, meaning planets that are probably covered by oceans everywhere. So a large bodies of planets that were not that are not present in the solar system. And this makes things very exciting to understand how these planets come from. And this has in particular led to think that the giant planet can form in two ways: accretion of gas around a solid massive core, like Jupiter we think was formed in the solar system. And another formation is gravitational instability in a disk, in which the planet directly forms from the gas, the disk of gas of dust, without going through the step of core accretion. Also, as I said earlier, to explain the planets that are very close to the star or very far away, we have the mechanisms that have been proposed is mainly planet migration through the disk and scattering by other systems. So you see that it's much more complicated, in fact, than what we thought like 50 or 40 years ago. We know a lot. I will not go into details, of course, about that, but using coupling the radial velocity and the transit observation, we are able to measure the density of the planet, and the density of a planet gives huge information, precious information on the composition of the interior of the planet. You can see first if the planets are likely to be gaseous or like Jupiter, Saturn, and so on. The structure, if what is the composition, in fact, it's mainly hydrogen or helium or other material. For the Earth, for the telluric planet like the Earth, you can start to get information on the composition of the planet, if it is purely here, for instance, a purely iron planet, the proportion of water also. So we can get a lot of information, indirect information. We'll never go and see this planet from being close to this planet, but nonetheless we are able to test to have information of the interiors. And this is because we are able to make comparison with the solar system planet. We are also able to detect, to study the atmosphere and detect molecular compounds in the atmosphere. And this is, for instance, Beta Pictoris b, where we see the absorption of carbon monoxide and water absorption. And these are very precious. We do this, the examination of the composition of the planet atmosphere is very important, and in particular it will be very important if we want to search for sign of life on other planets. It will be actually the only way to know if there is life on other planets. We are not able to say that today, but in the future we will have to do this type of studies by spectroscopy, disperse the light of the planet itself to study the chemical composition of the planet. And here we need to have, as I said earlier, we need to have a lot of skills, and we have to know a little bit about, in particular, about chemistry to do so. So we have learned already a lot of things since 30 years. We know that planetary systems are frequent. We know that they are very diverse, meaning that they don't look like the solar system. Actually, so far, we are not able to detect planetary systems that are similar to the Sun because of technical reasons. We have learned a bit about the formation of the extrasolar planetary system. Of course, we don't know everything, and there is still a lot to know, and we don't know about if there are signatures of life. So we have a lot of observational and theoretical challenges for the future. We want to explore the population of planets, especially we want to detect planets that would be exactly similar to the giant planet in the solar system and the Earth in the solar system. We want to explore in fine details the birthplace of planets, and we want to look for signatures of life. To do so, there are several projects, instrumental projects that will be used, and maybe the best known ones are the JWST, which will be launched hopefully on December 18th this year, the successor of the Hubble Space Telescope, to do images and spectroscopy of planets. And on the European side, we are building the extremely large telescope in Chile that will be a 39-meter diameter optical telescope that will be used again to observe a giant and super Earth planet. It will be we will have the first light in about 5 years, and there is also a lot of there are also ESA missions, so European Space Agency mission to detect planets in transit and to do spectroscopy of a transiting planet at the end of this decade. So you see several instruments, telescopes, and a lot of efforts from a community that now gathered hundreds of people working in exoplanetology. While when I started working in the field, we were maybe, let's say, 10 working on that, 10 or 20 people maybe working on that subject. Then after that, in the late 30s, We will have other instruments to make images of hopefully super Earth or Earth-like planets. And they are under studies by NASA at this moment. And then there is a question of the existence of life outside the Earth. As usual, it is an ancient question. As usual, it is a very debated question since a long time, since centuries. Kepler thought that, yes, there should be life somewhere else, and Galileo didn't believe that life could be present somewhere else. So you see, there is still a lot to know. Maybe the next generation will answer this question. I don't know. It is possible. So I will finish here my talk and leave you some takeaway messages. Astronomy addresses fundamental questions to humankind, and the next decades will be crucial to detect planets, to understand how they form, to detect Earth-like planets, and maybe to detect signatures of life somewhere else. Astronomy is also a great tool to promote science among students and pupils, and I would advise to use this tool as much as possible so that young pupils and students get involved in basic science and see how important it is, and get the skills in mathematics, in physics, chemistry. It's useful for astronomy, but it's useful for many purposes in life. Astronomy has a very great future, many projects. Astronomy needs bright people with very various skills. And so we need bright people to join, and I hope that people who are listening to this talk will be convinced and maybe interested to join. And I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lagrange. So we can take a few questions. So Professor Lagrange started with some historical perspectives of how people view planetary systems, and then she shared with us various techniques to detect exoplanets. And I hope she has convinced you that fundamental science is very important for studies of astronomy. So I saw a question from Yuxiang. So you can either raise your hands or type your question in the chat. Yuxiang, do you want to pose your question by yourself?
Just I want to know about what are the advantage and disadvantage between a vortex coronagraph and a coronagraph.
I didn't catch. You want to know the advantages of?
I know there is two different method to direct image about exoplanet. So one is, as you say, using a coronagraph, and I have found another called vortex coronagraph. I think this is different things. And
okay, yeah, yes, there is actually a lot of effort that is being made in research and development about coronagraphs. And you have a flavor of coronagraph. You have the classical LEO coronagraph, where you put a mask in the focal plane, and you have also a mask in the pupil plane, but this is how it works. And you have also another type of device that was used, but it is also a coronagraph, the vortex coronagraph, which belong to the family of what we call phase coronagraph. They change the phase so that you have of the light coming on axis. So they mix the phase, if you want, so that you have a nulling interference of the light of the star. So this is indeed another technology which has been tested. We tested it on our instrument in Chile. It is working well. It is very powerful, but only if you have a very, very, very precise position of the star at the center of the vortex.
Okay, thank you.
And I see a raised hand by Qi Hong. So please unmute yourself.
Okay, so teacher, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so good afternoon, teacher. So I have two questions for you. So first one is now we know to observations the exoplanets, just the three method, the axis, the gravities, perturbations, and just to use your observatory to observe your target, just the three method we can use. So my question is it possible if we use this three kind of method to found the exoplanet and will be have the group limitation? Because like for example, the gravity perturbation they just can use to found the big mass the exoplanets, and occultation they just eclipse this method they just can use to found mostly it's best to use found the short circles the planets means their orbit are very short distance for the suns themselves. And if you use your observatory to observe the targets, and like teacher you says, because the planet mostly are very dark and the sun are very light, so this method just can use to find a very far away the distance between the planets and the sun are very far away exoplanets. So it's also possible that now most exoplanet is a big mass, it's a hot Jupiter, it's an ice planet, and always a very big planet is because there's a group limitation because this is three kind of method just can use to find the big planets. So it's also possible, and if this is correct, do we have anything method can fix this problem? And yeah, so to answer this question first.
Yeah, yes, indeed, as you have seen, we are still limited to close planets and to faraway planets. And all the effort now is to try to look at these intermediate planets, especially planets that are at the distance of Saturn, Jupiter, around the Sun. And we are very actively working on that. I have in particular an ERT, a European grant, that is focusing on these questions to look at planets at 5 or 10 AU, which is very difficult to do. Jupiter-like planets, it's very difficult in direct imaging. And also there will be Gaia, the satellite Gaia, which is measuring the position of the star in the position of the star very precisely. That will give information of the presence of planet between, let's say, 2 and 5 astronomical units. So there will be a very Gaia will detect probably thousands of planets in this distance. So we are in radial velocity. We are also trying to observe the star for many decades. Actually, you need if you want to detect a Jupiter around the star, you need 12 years. If you want to detect a Saturn, you need 20 years. So you see that it's becoming very long, and you have to monitor the star for a very long time. But people are trying to do that. It's exceedingly difficult, but yes, we really are trying to do that and to cover the whole space of mass separation diagram.
Teacher, so can you hear me again now?
Yeah, we do hear you.
Hello?
You had a connection problem.
Yeah, sorry, because my app. Yes, my app has a broken down. Suddenly restart. Yeah, so sorry. So, my second question is, so in the gravity perturbation, this kind of method inside. So this is a planet of very this is sun, and like you said, when you are to around this sun, and this sun is very, very, very small to moving. And my question is that because if this exoplanet system is a one planet and one sun, and they're moving are very simple, that's the truth. But if the exoplanet system has maybe it's the 7 planets, maybe it's 8 planets like our solar system, and how does the sun keep moving? Because they have the different masses, the planets, and they are in a different position. So how do they move into the sun? And it's a lot possible that there's 8 times the difference the planets, their masses. They move in this size just like one very very big masses planets to move in as a sun. Yeah, so it means the many planets their masses are combined and to under this sun to make them move. Sorry, my English is 2 words here.
Yeah, so what you are talking about multiple systems in which, so one star and several other planets. And depending on the techniques that you are using, it may be very difficult because, as you say, the star will has a motion due to each of the planets. So every gravitational perturbation of each planet gives an impact on the motion of the star. So if you want, with Gaia, for instance, which will really measure the position of the star in the sky, it will be extremely difficult to model these multiple system. We know that it will be difficult unless there is one planet that dominates the gravitational perturbation of the star. But if you look at transit, it's not a problem because you see each individual transit, so you can count the planets. Yeah, and you can look at you make an analysis of the each planet will give a given depth of the transit, so you will recognize it. And if you are using radial velocity, you also make a Fourier analysis of the radial velocity curves, and if it's not too complicated, you may analyze and identify the different planets at the different with different periods, orbital periods. The key thing is to have enough data, and because if you have only one system, it's quite easy. If you have many systems, the signal will superimpose, and it will become very difficult to get fine, precise estimation of the mass and the orbital period. But in principle, if you had a lot of telescope time, it would not be a problem.
So okay, so it's not correct. Is the multiple exoplanet system, their sun, their movements are biggest for one single planet system. Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's it. Yeah. I mean, if there is a system inside is a multiple exoplanet system, so that means this sun will be moving bigger for the one single planet system.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, teacher.
Okay, thank you. So do we have any other questions? You can raise your hand or type in the chat. Or if you, Hefeng.
Okay, thanks for the next talk. So I am curious about is there any recent progress on the polarization? So because I have heard about some, we can detect some theoretical study of the polarization from the exoplanet. So we can use the information to study the geography of the exoplanet, like the ocean. Yeah, so I'm wondering if any instrument progress.
Yes, there are progresses. We have there are theoretical studies, of course. In terms of observations, we have in the SPHERE instrument that we have built for the Very Large Telescope, we have a polarization. We have ZIMPOL, which is polarizing an instrument with a polarization facility, but we have not detected yet, and it's very difficult, and it's very model dependent, because of course you don't know how much the planet is polarized. But we are monitoring a few stars, a few systems to look for polarized light.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I also have a question, maybe a stupid one. So when you see a planet with direct imaging method, how do you measure the mass?
Yeah, this is very complicated, actually. We don't measure the mass because it's what we get is photons. So we measure the luminosity of the planet, and we need to use models, what we call evolution models, that give you a relations between the mass and the luminosity of the planet at a given wavelength as a function of time. The planets that we see today are still warm planets. They are warm because they have not completely cooled down from their formation. And the evolution models give us the evolution of the brightness of the planet as a function of time. And in fact, this is nice because we can deduce mass, but we know that there are probably uncertainties on that because these models have not been calibrated. What we need is to calibrate this model with planets for which we would know the mass by another way, using, for instance, radial velocity or indirect method, what we call the dynamical mass. So this is why systems like Beta Pictoris b or planets like that is very important, or even Beta Pictoris c is very important, because at some points we will be able to measure the mass of these planets using radial velocity. And we have the brightness, so we will calibrate this relation between brightness and masses. Because depending on the laws of cooling, the cooling of laws that we use, we end up with different laws, relation between mass and brightness.
So this is basically black body radiation, or do you also consider reflected light?
No, it's not black body radiation. It includes a lot. This model, in fact, include lots of let's say basics, but in fact already a little bit elaborated atmosphere models.
So we need to assume some compositions for the planets.
Yes, or at least it depends. Some will assume composition, or what we assumed some laws on the pressure, altitude laws, and then from that with an initial composition, and then you can play a little bit with the evolution.
Okay, thank you. So do we have any other questions? Maybe the final one, a last question for Professor Lagrange. If not, I will ask the last question. So do you have any advice for high school students if they want to become astronomer? How can they prepare themselves?
In fact, there are as astronomy, as I said, is very wide. There are many ways to do astronomy. You can be an astronomer like you and me. You can working, and in that case, you need to do to study physics, mathematics, and chemistry. I would say it's the most important. Physics being maybe probably the most important topic. But you can also do astronomy if you like optics, for instance, you can build instruments, and astronomy is really a science that is relying on optics, instruments, and computing. So if you like heavy computing as you do, modeling and so on, you can also be if you are a computer science person, you can work for astronomy as well, and because we really need this type of profile. If you like optics, there are also a lot of things to do. So you see, there are many ways to do astronomy or to be involved in astronomical projects.
Okay.
So you have to study and you have to believe, and you will see it. So you will agree with me that astronomy is really a lot of fun.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Lagrange. I hope students here are convinced that whatever you like, you can join the astronomy community one day. If you study hard enough. So I think we won't keep you longer. So thank you for joining us today. And I hope someday we can invite you over here to Taiwan.
Yeah, it will be a great pleasure to visit you and to talk with you. And thanks a lot.
Next time when I come to Paris, I'll certainly come visit you.
Oh, sure. I please do.
Yeah, I hope that will happen soon.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for joining us today. And so let's give a big hand to Professor Lagrange for her very nice talk today. I really enjoyed a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And goodbye.
Goodbye.